going to take note of this, but if I'm not seeing J or ST segment depression or elevation, and I'm not seeing changes in the T wave, I'm not so concerned at that point because there's no current event occurring. But it lends information to your patient's background. Again, normal 12-lead does not rule out the fact that someone might be suffering an acute MI. So just a few more EKGs for practice. If you're on page 19, go ahead and take a look at that one. And one thing we note right at the beginning here is the fact that we've got somewhat of a wandering baseline that targets the far right-hand section of this EKG. If that was creating a problem with your overread, what should you do? Repeat the 12. But I think we have enough information here that's going to help us. Is there an indicative pattern for infarct here? Where at? I think you would all agree V1, V2, V3, V4. Do we have it in V5? How about V6? It looks suspicious. Anyplace else? Good. Look at AVL and also lead 1. Not as dramatic, but definitely you have septal involvement, anterior involvement, and lateral involvement. So we've got an anteroseptal injury with extension to the lateral wall, or the typical phrase they'll use in hospital is just an extensive anterior injury. So evidence of septal, anterior, and lateral views, we call that an extensive anterior wall MI. Yes?
Would the right bundle branch block throw that off too?
Say one more time.
Would the right bundle branch block throw that off too?
So his question was about a right bundle branch block. This isn't a right bundle branch block because if I look at my QRS duration, it's actually within normal values. And we're going to talk about bundle branch block when we get to the last module today. And we'll talk about those deviations and what it can do for your EKG. How about the one on page 20? Normal looking EKG, right? Indicative pattern? Yes? No? Where at? V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, AVL, lead 1. Again, another extensive anterior infarct. And then how about the one on page 21? Three leads that should smack your eyesight, right? Look at 2, 3 in AVF. We know that 2-3 and AVF look at the inferior wall of the left ventricle, so we have another representation of an inferior wall injury. Everybody see that? Now, we've been looking at a lot of nagging ST segment depression on these EKGs as well. And most of you are already familiar with this, but we'll review it just again. Reciprocal change. It's mirror imaging. So when we pick up the infarct process, we're relying on a skin sensor or a patch, the positive electrode, looking directly at the injury site. What if we were to take a picture of that same area from an opposing plane? The picture is going to look different. It's going to be a mirror image. And it's strong confirming evidence that we do have an infarct, because not only do we have leads looking at the injury site showing change, but we've got leads opposing the injury site showing the same change in an upside down fashion. So that's what we've been seeing on those EKGs. So again, camera looking directly in, we see J-plane ST segment elevation. I take a camera from another plane looking directly in, it's going to be upside down. Easiest way to remember it, I always use the teeter-totter method or seesaw method. Your inferior leads on one side, 2-3 and AVF, all the rest of your leads on the other side. So let's say this side is up. 2-3 and AVF are elevated, we should look for reciprocal change in this area. And then the inverse is true. If one AVL and V leads are up, I should look for reciprocal change over here. That gives us our opposing planes. So if you look at the EKG on page 23, do you all agree that this is an inferior wall injury? Look at 2-3 and AVF. J-point ST segment elevation, anatomically grouped. If I go back to that seesaw method, if 2-3 and AVF are elevated, where should I look for reciprocal change? One AVL or the V leads. This isn't in your book, but you can jot it down. The two leads that will give you the most predominant reciprocation from an inferior wall MI are 1 and AVL. So if you think about it, an inferior wall injury, I only need the left side of my EKG. Here's my elevation. I look directly above. If these are depressed, that's all I need. 1 in AVL, strongest reciprocation for an inferior wall injury. Now, do we have reciprocal change in the rest of this EKG? It's real subtle, but you've got depression in V2, depression in V3, but these are significant. And that's all you need. How about the one on page 24? Injury pattern present, yes or no? And where is it at? Good, I heard it back here, extensive. So that must mean that we've got involvement in septal leads, do we? Yes. Do we have involvement in anterior leads? Yes. How about our lateral leads?
Yes.
Not so much V6, but look at V5, look at lead AVL, look at lead 1. Is there reciprocal change on this EKG?
Yes.
Right here, 2, 3, AVL. So this whole EKG has transitioned due to that infarct. Remember I told you about R wave progression earlier? Because my infarct is right here, the QRS remains predominantly negative or very small amplitude all the way through V4. Normally you see a transition from negative to positive around V3 or V4. So the R-wave progression has been screwed up here also due to that infarct pattern. So we talked about reciprocal change, what its importance is. It's not an exact science. Not every infarct will give you reciprocal change. Predominantly, they will. So as we get to the end of this module, and I know you guys are ready for a break, and we'll give you one, I want you to look at the EKG on page 25. Call comes into 911, heart-related issue. Dispatch goes out. Let's imagine for a moment that we have the ability, every one of us, to pile into the back of one truck. We all show up at the scene. We go into the patient's house. We do a 12 lead. This is what comes spitting out. We pass it around for everyone to look at. Here's the question. Is this person infarcting? What do you say? Yes? Tell me how you came up with that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. How'd you come up with that? What are you seeing here?
Elevation 2, 3 AVF.
Okay, elevation 2, 3 in AVF.
So it's B1, 2, 3.
You also have it in B1, B2, B3, B4. It's kind of all over the place, right? To be a block. What if I told you that this is the patient's normal EKG? There's a pattern present here that mimics infarct, and it's called left bundle branch block. So while we've given you a small part of the story, how to pick up an injury pattern, it's not the whole story. As medics, as nurses, whatever field you're in for 12-lead interpretation, you have to know those other issues. And when we get to the last module of today, we're going to talk about the infarct mimickers. And we're going to share with you a process for figuring out what that is. And it takes going over that information repeatedly to kind of get it centered in your brain and utilize that during patient assessment and therapy. So here's what we're going to talk about later on today. The most frequent imitators, bundle branch block, specifically left. Left ventricular hypertrophy is another one. Benign early reef-hole pattern, pericarditis, and there's a few others that we're going to mention. So we'll spend considerable time later on this afternoon talking about those patterns. So just to summarize this first module, we know what we're looking for. We know where we're looking as far as our lead views. We talked about reciprocal change and what importance that is. And we know that when we have an indicative pattern, it's presumptive evidence of an acute MI, and it's also the indication for acute reperfusion therapy. And I know I keep going back to this, but it's vitally important. And in modules 3 and 4, we're going to talk about the acute coronary syndromes. So at the tail end of this module, I think there's 5 or 6 EKGs that what I would like to do is have you guys navigate through those on your own. You can work with the person sitting next to you. And I want you to render your interpretation based upon the stuff that we covered this morning. Please feel free to get up, stretch your legs, get something to drink, go out wherever. So we'll give you some time to do that, take a bit of a break, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to go over those with you. Okay?